Topic for today's video: Azure Virtual NAT. NAT simply means Network Address Translation. So let's first understand what is uh, Azure NAT, what it does, and then we'll try to understand deep dive with the help of an scenario. Let's simply draw a very simple network, a virtual network. Okay, this is Azure Virtual Network, and inside Virtual Network, we have multiple subnets. Let's suppose we have subnet 1 and subnet 2, and we may have one or more VM inside the subnet. So let's call it subnet 1 and call it subnet 2, and we may have a VM. Let's VM1 here and one virtual machine here. This is a very simple setup just to understand NAT service or NAT gateway service of Azure. In this situation, if these machine needs to access internet, this is internet, this will go directly to the internet. In the case of default, without any setting, when we deploy VM inside Azure, it has directly access to the internet or outbound connections through the pool of IP addresses that Azure uses for this service, which is good for dev maybe or test maybe, but in real environment, we don't use it. We would like to control the traffic for security reasons, for compliance reasons. Okay, but we are here to understand virtual NAT gateway. That's the reason I'm just showing this thing. So if we utilize, or if you like to control the outbound internet traffic, we could simply use a service called network virtual NAT or NAT gateway. So this uh, virtual network is inside Azure. Okay, why I'm creating this Azure? Because NAT gateway is an Azure service which do not gets deployed inside the virtual network, but we will engage subnet or associate subnet with this service so that all the traffic going out from that particular subnet will go through the NAT gateway. Okay, now same if we associate this particular subnet with this NAT gateway, then the traffic going out of this VM will not go directly now as it was going in the default state, but it will go to the NAT gateway, and the public IP associated with this NAT gateway will let the traffic go to the internet. This is what the NAT gateway does. Now, if we have not associated this subnet with the NAT gateway, in that scenario, this will directly go to the internet by utilizing Azure default, or if there is any other mechanism that you're using. So now let's define what is Azure Virtual NAT. Well, it is a service, it is a managed service that provides outbound internet connectivity, because that's what we are doing here. Outbound internet connectivity. That's what it provides. Outbound internet connectivity. With this example, it is pretty clear. Okay. Now, to whom it is providing the outbound connectivity? To the Azure resources or resources deployed in the virtual network without requiring any public IP. If we associate public IP with the VM, then it can utilize that public IP for the internet, but it is not a safe bet, not recommended at all attaching public IP to the VM directly. right? So without requiring public IP on individual resources, you can have the control of outbound internet connectivity with the help of Azure Virtual NAT or NAT Gateway. So what exactly it is doing? It is acting as a translation layer. We can write it translation layer. That's what the NAT means. Network address translation. So it is acting as a translation layer, mapping the private IP address associated of this resource to the public IP address associated with the NAT gateway. That's what the translation is happening. And it could have this NAT gateway can have single public IP or the prefixes that we have already learned in the previous video of this particular series for outbound access. Now, in a nutshell, I'm pretty sure the idea of NAT is clear. What the Virtual NAT Gateway is in Azure, it provides outbound internet connectivity to the resources running inside the virtual network. We deploy it as a service and connect it with the subnets or associate with the subnet. We can associate it with single subnet or multiple subnet as well. We can have a single public IP or multiple public IP with the NAT gateway as well. And we need not to create any UDRs so that we ask the network go through net. It all happens by automatically by system routes, as we have already learned in previous video. Whenever we deploy like peering, system routes deploy automatically. VPN gateway, system routes deploy automatically because it is Azure service. Similarly, if we deploy NAT gateway, Azure deployed system routes, that all the machines running in this particular subnet, the traffic, the outbound 0.0.0.0 slash 0, the internet traffic will not go directly, but it will go to the NAT gateway. And then utilizing this public IP or IP addresses, it will go to the internet. In a nutshell, this is what it is. Now let's try to understand the benefits, the key idea or features of NAT Gateway with the help of a very simple business case. So let's suppose there is an e-commerce company hosting its web application on Azure in a simple hub and spoke architecture. Let's suppose this is our hub VNet, and this is our spoke VNet right here. This is our spoke VNet, and these are connected to each other maybe through peering. Okay, and in hub VNet we have shared services like Active Directory, DNS, firewall, Bastion, things like that. Okay, now the application is deployed in a private subnet within a spoke VNet. So what we have multiple subnets here, and this entire spoke VNet is a private virtual network. Okay, and in that we have private subnets. Let me write it down: private subnet with no internet access. On this private subnet we have deployed our application. Okay, we have deployed our application maybe on a virtual machine. There is a virtual machine. Okay, on a private subnet. And why? For security reasons in a private subnet, right? Now we have certain requirements. Customer has certain requirements. Let's see what are those requirements. All right, let's see what are the requirements. Customers requirements. The very first is this application. It fetches real-time pricing updates from an external API. Okay, so which means uh, there are certain APIs running somewhere. Okay, This is a hypothetical example, but quite related and relevant. It happens all the time. There are some APIs where this application needs access, so which means we have to go via internet, right? We have to go via internet to fetch the information of APIs. So this application needs to go to these APIs and fetch the information via internet. This is the first ask, and these are external APIs, which means needs internet. External APIs, real-time information or pricing updates from here. During sales events, the app handles thousands of requests per second for pricing updates, leading to high outbound traffic to the API, which means we have users, not user, but users. There are like thousands of users accessing the application, requesting for the pricing updates. Okay, so it would be like from here, it will come to this application, and application will go to these IP addresses for fetching what thousands of request fetching pricing updates from here. This is another requirement, and so we can write here high volume. Okay, this is another requirement. Now company needs a consistent egress IP for all outbound traffic for compliance and audit reasons. This is something which is usually happen in all the enterprises. Compliance for consistent egress IP, so that they can have all the logging and auditing easily, and for the security reasons. Now this pricing application should have a public IP and should not have a public IP. That is for the security and compliance region. The app server, no public IP associated with this. And of course, they don't want to assign individual public IPs to every VM for hosting the applications. Maybe there are multiple VMs for high availability or fault tolerance, for cost as well. So these are the main four requirement of our customer, and how we are going to solve it. Let's suppose if we are not using NAT gateway that we have learned right now, in that situation, the default Azure outbound access uses shared IPs that changes dynamically, making it impossible to whitelist IPs over here, because there is a requirement. These people will not allow. There is a proper firewall here where we have to allow the public IP, allow PIP. Otherwise, everyone can access these APIs, but might be these folks have taken the subscription, paying some money, and are requesting them to open one particular IP address for them so that they can fetch the information. But it cannot happen through Azure default outbound access. Now, also default outbound connectivity cannot handle high traffic, because we know thousands of requests on the sales events. It cannot handle high traffic volume efficiently, leading to potential bottlenecks if we are using default Azure thing. And of course, security concerns, because we cannot assign public IP to the virtual machine. So the solution is simple. Let's again, this is hub, this is spoke. So what we are going to deploy? We are going to deploy a NAT gateway. This will solve the requirement of our customer. We are going to deploy NAT gateway and will associate this subnet with the NAT gateway. Now what will happen? The first thing is external APIs. When we deploy NAT gateway, we get public IP address, okay, or IP single or multiple that we decide. So these IPs can easily be allowed over their firewall when we let them know these are the APIs, and no IP is associated with the application, and application still in the private subnet, and the request will go to the NAT gateway. All right. So no public IP solved, egress IP solved, external APIs, so they can allow the IPs that is solved. Now the high volume. Now NAT gateway provides or helps uh, solving this high volume as well, because they have multiple IP addresses, and it's a managed service with this scalability feature as well. So during sales event, a NAT gateway handles the high volume of outbound traffic without breaking a sweat. Maintaining application performance, that is the requirement. So that's how NAT gateway is solving the problem, taking care of all the requirement, as you can see right here. I hope with this scenario, we know now how we are using NAT gateway, why we're using the NAT gateway, right? And no need to deploy any routes, UDR, and things like that. It is all automated. Now, there could be a scenario or there could be a question bothering you. What about the firewall? We may have firewall here, right? And firewall has public IPs, right? Why not utilizing firewall for this scenario? Why only deploying NAT gateway? Now there is two things. The very first thing, again, thousands of requests, and we know we have to fetch the information from there. Everything is, we already know these are the outbound requests to this APIs. We don't want to go these thousands of requests to the firewall, which will give a lot of stress on the firewall, a lot of scanning, latency, which is not exactly the requirement, because firewall provides deep packet inspection, logging, threat intelligence, and a lot of many things. But here internet is not coming to us. We are making specific requests to this external IP, which already has a firewall where only our public IP is allowed. So in that situation, rather giving a lot of stress to the firewall, we can utilize NAT gateway and simply utilize the features of NAT gateway and get fetch the information from this API. And these requests, the user request may come through the firewall. Okay, you might have a WEF here. Okay, so we can use them side by side. Now, if we have to conclude this, uh, we should use NAT gateway for lightweight, high performance outbound connectivity that doesn't need the inspection. In that situation, we can use this side by side with the firewall. It is more like place Azure Firewall in the hub for centralized security, scanning, filtering, etc. And use NAT Gateway for specific SPOC VNets where the traffic doesn't need to pass through the firewall, like this scenario, or maybe for the dev and test, so that we will not giving a lot of stress to the firewall and things will go as it's supposed to be. All right. For example, uh, just to give it a little more weight, a high performance batch processing. For example, a Spoke VNet runs batch jobs that access internet APIs for data ingestion. These jobs don't need deep inspection but require consistent public IPs for whitelisting. And in particular example of ours also. Let's see another example, a subnet with Azure VM needs occasional internet access for patching, right? In that situation, the request is single public IP for the outbound connectivity, because we are going to connect to that particular MS website to get the patches, right? So in hub and spoke architecture, Azure Firewall handles critical traffic, but non-critical traffic like dev test workload, we can bypass it using NAT gateway. The approach reduces firewall cost and improves the overall performance. So let's go and quickly check in our lab. If we go to NAT gateway, we try to create the NAT gateway, you will easily understand it requires simple name, the name, region, and there is one more, outbound IP. You can see single IP or IP prefixes, range of the IP address. Here you need to provide the virtual network where you would like to utilize this service along with the subnets. With subnets, you would like to use it. For example, app subnet in this particular scenario. And you can simply review and create. Nothing more information is needed. Once it is created, it would be like this. And here you can see the outbound IP address that you are utilizing for internet connectivity, and these are the subnets which are utilizing this particular NAT gateway service for the outbound configuration. So that's how it works. And this is what the NAT gateway service of Azure is. I hope it was informative and you guys liked it. Thank you for watching, and you guys have a wonderful